let's get started. Hello and welcome to This is Recruiting. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're here for the first time, This is Recruiting is a webinar series that we at HackerEarth have created to bring in the best in the industry to help you by telling you their stories and insights on important topics that are discussed in our recruiter community. So if you're hearing about HackerEarth for the first time, let me tell you a little about us. So we are basically like matchmakers for developers and tech recruiters or engineering managers to help them hire the best tech talent. And we do this because we have an entire suite of tools that help you across your hiring lifecycle. So we start off with attracting and sourcing. We can help you with sourcing top developers through our assessment platform. We also help you with remote interviewing as well through our remote interviewing tool. And finally, we help you upskill and continuously engage your talent with hackathons and hiring challenges. So today, the topic that we're talking about is different ways to wow your candidates and give them the best candidate experience. So just to build up a little bit about that, in HackerEarth, we help you build your candidate experience by giving you our set of tools right there, things you see on the screen. In our assessments, we help you by crafting special practice tests. We help you by conducting coding tests in a way that your candidates can debug coding problems easily. They can debug their code easily. They can make sure to add comments as well as, note down their whole process during the test. During interviews, we give them the best experience through our remote interviewing tool, which means candidates are directly talking to their interviewers and the interviewers are assessing them as and when they are conducting these different coding interviews. So you can watch them and assess them in real time, which is super important in this hybrid world, of course. And finally, when it comes to continuous engagement, that's post your interview or even, during the initial stages of engaging your candidate once they join, we have internal as well as external hackathons and hiring challenges. So if you'd like to know more, you can find our link on the chat box below and check us out there. Just a reminder to everyone on call today, we are offering free resource bundles to everyone who's attended our webinar. So all you need to do to claim it is fill in the survey form as soon as the webinar is done. And then we will ask you for the type of resources you'd like to receive and we'll send them over to you. So before, to get started on our main topic of the day and to introduce our incredible panelists, we have Kevin Peacock and Gaurav Nagpal joining us today, two leaders of recruiting at Demandbase. Now, I'm sure everyone on this call is well aware of Demandbase. You're aware of how big the company is right now. And given the size of the company, I'm sure Kevin and Gaurav have had their own challenges with recruiting so far, especially with candidate engagement and experience, which is why we have them on today. And thank you so much, Kevin and Gaurav, for joining us. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourselves and your background so far in recruitment? Let's start with you, Kevin.
Well, it's wonderful to be here, and thanks for having us. My name is Kevin Peacock, and I've been recruiting for about 15 years now. Started out with Castlight Health, and then moved on to several smaller startups, and now I'm here at Demandbase. I've been at Demandbase for 5 years and have grown the company from about 120 to around 800 people.
That's awesome. 120 to 800. I mean, I think most of the people on this call haven't seen those numbers before in their lives. So looking forward to hearing more about that soon. Gaurav, why don't you go next?
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. So my name is Gaurav. Good morning, good evening, from no matter whichever part of the world you are from. But thank you so much for joining this call. And I lead the recruiting function for Demandbase in India. And it's almost like 6 years that I'm associated with this organization with an overall experience of like 10 plus years now. The core of my job has always been recruiting, which involves the bread and butter, which is like the delivery part of it, taking care of the stakeholder management, analytics reporting. And the most important part is the value addition part in talent acquisition, which would involve process efficiencies, quality of hire, employer branding, and the most important part, which is the power of candidate experience, which I generally say. So I think I'm so glad to be a part of this session and looking forward to this. And thanks, Rebecca, for organizing this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. So let's get started and move directly into some of the questions that, we've received from our recruiter community. So we've all heard, the topic itself is 5 ways to create a wow candidate experience, right? And we've heard about traditional ways that this happens, like maybe creating better job descriptions or simplifying the application process, etc. But I think one thing that, a lot of our recruiters resonate with is how do you create a good candidate experience for each of your candidates when you're hiring in bulk? Right? So in the case that you're conducting, like say a university recruitment drive or, just a mass recruiting event, how do you ensure that each candidate is still having a good experience, especially during these kind of events? So let's start off with Kevin. Can you please tell us let's start off with Gaurav first, actually. Can you tell us a little bit about, what your experience is with different mass recruiting events and how you would have handled this?
Yeah, so thanks, Rebecca. I think this is a good question because what I see, at least if I talk from the India context, it's very easy to give a good candidate experience when it comes to the lateral recruiting, but when it comes to the mass recruiting, when it comes to the volume recruiting, I think candidate experience generally goes for a toss. And it's not like it's unfair to expect like 100% result here, 100% candidate experience, because when you're dealing with like say 150, 200 odd people, it's not easy to give a good candidate experience. But I'm pretty sure it could be better than what it is right now in the industry. Like there are a lot of concerns we see. Like the first thing is when you're doing a drive for like 150, 200 odd people, the process, the setting up the right expectations with the candidate, I think there is a big, flaw over there because, the candidates turn up for the recruiting drive and they're not sure, what exactly is going to be the process, right? So sometimes we are told that, there are 2 technical rounds, but what exactly those 2 technical rounds are all about?
Exactly.
We really need to set those expectations. Like if it's a first technical round, like it's a coding round, or it's, you'll be evaluated on data structures algorithms. You'll be evaluated on like this programming language, which could be Java, which could be C or C++. So you really need to give that understanding to the candidate before they turn up for the interview or interview process, rather. I think that's really important. Another concern which I see is that the time sensitivity with respect to the process, because, generally what the organization says, like, we will start the process at 10 o'clock and we'll complete it by 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, but that never happens. Like, and hardly there would be a case when that actually happens. So I think it is very important for us to, plan the things in a better manner. We need to keep those buffers and everything, because ultimately we need to be very respectful of everyone's time. And that is what we typically call as the experience. That's really important. And I think if you do a better planning, I think this is really, really going to help. Another concern which I typically see is the time it takes for the interviewer or the organization to get back to the candidates in terms of the feedback. I think there is a very delayed response. There have been cases where the candidate keeps waiting for like hours and hours and days to get the feedback, but they don't get the feedback.
Right.
And one thing which really triggers me is that most of the organizations, they really take care of the candidate who is qualifying each and every interview round. So the person who is clearing all the interview rounds, they're really concerned about that. But they're not very much concerned about the candidate, who is not clearing the rounds or who's getting rejected during the process. I feel like, no matter if it's a candidate that you're going to hire or if it's a hireable candidate or an unhireable candidate, I think what is really important to understand is, after all, for recruiting or for the organization, candidate is our customer. So there is nothing called like a good customer or a bad customer. It is really imperative for any organization to give a good candidate experience to all the people who are joining these recruiting drives. So I feel like these are the major challenges, at least which I have personally seen in my experience. And if we kind of work on it, I would say like we may not be like perfect in terms of the candidate experience, but we can really become very close to perfection. So this is what I think about.
Yeah, all very valid points. I mean, transparency in the process is definitely a big thing. I would agree. I mean, being an engineer myself, I've gone through these recruiting processes, and there's always, doubts as to what you have to do next. And I'm sure like that makes a big difference, of course. Let's go to you, Kevin. Can you tell us a little bit about what you would think is something that would make for better candidate experience during mass hiring?
Sure. When Demandbase is something we'd call mass hiring with SDRs or inside salespeople, and these are the people that we hire a lot of. We hire them often because they generally spend about 1.5 to 2 years in the role before they move on to become a salesperson, or perhaps move out of the company. And so we're recruiting for, a lot of them often. And the things that Gaurav said are very valid. And sometimes it sounds easy, get back to the candidate on time and give them a heads up on what their recruiting process is going to look like at your company. But it's way more tricky, to put that actually into effect when you're dealing with a bunch of people at the same time. It's actually easier, we find, dealing with a mass hiring for one particular role and to keep track of those candidates versus, if you have 20 roles and you have 20 active candidates in each of those roles and they're in different stages of the process and all of that. And there's a different process for each different role, much harder to keep track of. So it's a little bit easier when you're doing mass hiring for one particular role. Getting back to the candidates quickly is obviously key. I think that involves coordination between the recruiting coordinator, if you have one, and the recruiter. And part of the recruiting coordinator's job is not only to do the scheduling, but also kind of keep things on track and make sure the balls don't get dropped. So again, if you're lucky enough to have a recruiting coordinator, using them in that way is helpful. Understanding the process up front is super key, just to explain what it's going to look like, what steps the candidate has to take, and then again, what the outcomes could be. A lot of times with SDR hiring, I'll actually give candidates a heads up on why they could be rejected. And so they understand that. And so when it comes time to actually reject them, it's, rejecting candidates is always an unpleasant thing. Even if they, have been a challenging candidate, it's never nice to decline people. But if you set the expectation of where the possible pitfalls are and why you might be declined at some point, when it comes time to actually decline them, it's a little bit easier. It's easier for the recruiter declining the person, and it's easier for the person receiving this information. Those are like, we discussed this, ahead of time, that this is one of these things. I'm also a big fan of giving substantive feedback. So not just we found a better candidate, or, we thought you fell short in an area. Actually giving them feedback that's meaningful, and perhaps useful to them, something that they could correct or note the next time that they're going through an interview process. And then the third thing we do is actually give the candidates a heads up on what kind of testing and line of questioning will happen during the interview.
Right.
We don't give away, the answers to it, but we want to get them to start thinking, like, particularly for the SDR role, because I think the candidates don't really know what to expect. Oftentimes companies have an easy interview and some have a quite challenging one. And we're quite challenging. And so I want to, tee up the candidates in a way that they feel prepared to handle the interview and hopefully be successful through it.
Right. So I'm sensing a theme here, with basically you're making sure that candidates have the least amount of uncertainty, right? You're giving them a heads up with things, and as well as I think it's super important to give them a heads up about why they might be rejected as well. I think that's really important when they're going back and working on their profiles and they know at least where they could have gone wrong. I think that's super important, definitely. And with all these things, like, I can see how it would make for a better experience overall. But there's also a problem that we observe quite often, right? You have candidates who you've tried everything with, and yet somehow they drop off during points in the process, right? So in your experience, what is the common drop-off point in the talent pipeline, and why do you think that is? Let's start with you, Kevin.
I think the two areas where people drop off are after the recruiter screen and then in the offer stage. The recruiter screen, a candidate may be underqualified, so we'd drop them off. They may be overcompensated, so way out of the range that we're looking for. Or sometimes after understanding the scope of the role, they may self-select out. They may come to a mutual understanding. Like maybe this isn't the right role for me. So those things can happen in the recruiter stage, early stage, top of funnel type of area. And then the other one is the offer stage. Usually people who pass the recruiter screen and pass the hiring manager screen, they will get the on-site interview and go through the process. Generally, they don't drop out there unless timing is off and they have and another offer comes to them and they decide to take it. But usually the next drop off point for us is the offer stage. And that can be because, again, the timing, they may have other interviews that they're going through that have accelerated. They may get an offer coming in when we're not quite ready to give ours. Right. And then the second reason is really compensation misalignment. When we recruit, we ask the candidate up front during the first phone call with the recruiter about compensation, just to make sure we're aligned, not fixating on any particular number, but just making sure we're in the ballpark. Both, the company's in the ballpark for the candidate, and the candidate's expectations are, within our range. But oftentimes when it comes to the offer stage, those numbers magically change. Oftentimes it's a misalignment between base salary, bonus, and sometimes people also consider RSUs as compensation. When they're asked the question, what is your compensation? They'll lump all of these things together, and give you a number. Some of them don't do that, and they just give you your base. And so the bonus hasn't been discussed, nor has the idea of entering the RSUs as part of your compensation been discussed. So then there's, when you come to the offer stage, there's a misalignment because you're going to offer them something around the number they gave, but the number they gave was only a fraction, 1/3 of
right.
What goes is involved in the compensation. So those are kind of some of the reasons that they drop out at offer stage.
Got it. And that's super insightful to know. I wouldn't think that many people would drop off during an offer stage, but yeah, it all comes down to communication at the end, right? Gaurav, let's go to you. What are your opinions on it? Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin, did you have anything to add there?
I was going to say, it's also a good learning, because when these things happen, further down the pipeline, you can take action ahead of time to make sure and really, instead of just asking about compensation, get very specific, understand what the base is, what the bonus is, if they want to share it, and any RSUs. And now here in California, we can't ask a candidate what their salary is. What we can ask is the range that they like, the range that they think that this role should be in, or that they want to get paid, or what have you. And then once they give you the range, you can ask, does that include your bonus? Does that include RSUs or anything else that goes into play?
And in your experience, putting this into practice at Demandbase, has this worked out well? Do you see lesser drop-off?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have close to a 99% acceptance rate. So yes, it's worked very well.
Okay, that's good to know. Gaurav, let's go on to you, about what would you say in your experience is like a common drop-off point? Because Kevin, of course, we're targeting it from a US perspective, and maybe you can give us some insights into what happens here in India as well.
Yeah. So I think from the India context, we have a lot of dropouts at the offer stage. So that's probably a difference between the US side and the India side, because we have a pretty lengthy notice period. And
right.
That's typically the reason we have a lot of drop-offs at the offer stage. And typically the reasons are, the compensation, it could be branding, it could be the quality of work, it could be n number of reasons. But I want to actually touch base, I want to kind of relate it with the candidate experience, because there have been a lot of offer declines that we had in past 2 years, because, the market is crazy, right? The market was super crazy. At least now it is not that crazy, but, a few months back, it was a super crazy market. So we had a lot of offer declines, but what happened was the candidates who declined our offer, they came back to us after a period of 5 to 6 months. And the reason why they came back to us is typically because of the power of candidate experience. So we give a great experience to these candidates when they were getting interviewed, and they had a really positive impression about Demandbase at that point of time. And when things were not really working well for them in the other organization, typically because of work culture or because of the values of the company or XYZ factors, the company that was registered on the top of their mind was Demandbase. And they came back to us. They gave us a call. They said, I think we made a wrong call by not choosing Demandbase at that point of time. I think the people were very respectful. We had a great experience. And it was just a matter of so a candidate typically spends 4 to 5 hours with the organization during the process, not more than that. But we kind of gave such a great experience to them that, the name of the company, which is Demandbase, got registered on their mind. And they said, we want to join this company back. And we got those candidates back. So That's what I would say. That's the power of candid experience. I know there can be a lot of reasons for the declines. It could be compensation, branding, a number of reasons for it. It could be the tech stack and all. But with the candid experience, we were able to win the candidates back. So I think it is very imperative for all the organizations to really focus on the candid experience, even if in case the candidate is not joining you, they'll still hold some sort of impression about you and about your company, and we can always win them back. So that's something which I just wanted to add to this. But yeah, I think I'm pretty much aligned with what Kevin said. So recruiter stage and drop-off points are the major two steps where we receive a lot of drop-offs as such.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so interesting to know that, in this case, I think in your case, your employer brand also helped a lot, right? Having people recognize the whole experience as well as the company name, that was super important in getting back people as well, right? And these are one of the first stories that I've heard where, candidates are coming back to you after rejecting and saying, hey, like, we want to join you. That's incredible. Just doing a quick digression here, because we have a question here based on what Kevin, I think, had mentioned. An anonymous attendee has asked, how do you negotiate salary? And I think this ties back into what, Kevin, you were mentioning in the initial screening round, right? Where you're asking about compensation and whether they give you a range. And I think it will be especially important in the context where you can't get their previous salary, right? So in that case, how would you negotiate it?
What we typically do is, again, have that conversation up front, kind of figure out where they're looking to fall. And then we'll know based on the benchmarks if they're, within, industry standards for that role and that level. And then further, they go through the interview process, and not a whole lot is spoken about compensation during that point. And then it comes up again, obviously, at the end when you're getting ready to make the offer. The recruiters do a pre-close conversation at Demandbase. So we have the ability to make the offer before it's actually approved by finance. We have guidelines to operate within. And so if we're hiring like a level 4, CSM or a level 4 engineer, we have the range that we can offer them. And we have the latitude to offer any, kind of anything within that range. And so now we know, we have 2 data points. We have what the candidate's looking for, we hope. And then we have the data point of where the comp should fall. And so we also, though, that gets into the company's philosophy on compensation. We believe we compensate very competitively. Not only do we have the luxury to do so, but we also feel that if you pay somebody really competitively within the market, they're going to not be spending, they're not going to spend their time and their energy looking for other positions or wondering if they came to the right company and they're in the right position. They're going to spend their time doing their job, and getting paid well for it. So we offer them verbally what we think is fair. It's probably going to be a little bit higher than what they were making. And within our range. And they have 24 hours to think about that. And oftentimes they come back and they say, well, I was really thinking about, this. And usually at that point, it's more of a give and take on base and bonus. For us, we pay a base and bonus for most of our roles. And so we may take a little bit off of the base and put it on the bonus, or vice versa, to kind of come up with a package that makes sense. And then, we have the nice part of the equity piece. We're not a public company, so there's no true value yet on our stock. That's a little bit tough. But we really sell the opportunity of the company and coming in at the early stages and how much that stock could be worth at some point. So we're able to also negotiate down some of the cash, then put it on the equity if that works for both the company and the candidate.
Got it. And Gaurav, let's quickly touch up as well with you, from an Indian context. This is also something that a lot of people have problems with here, right? With recruiters. And here you have the luxury of asking people about their salary. You get the exact split up as well. That's something that's almost mandatory for people to disclose, right? So in that case, how would you negotiate?
So the philosophy that we have at Demandbase in India is slightly different. We don't go completely by their current compensation and decide, like, say, X percentage hike on their current compensation, what we typically do here is we see like what kind of level we are hiring them at. Like, in our organization, we have certain levels, right? So
Right.
like just for an example, I can say like A1, A2, A3, A4 levels. We have to just ensure like, what level we are hiring them at, and see what is the right compensation in the market for that particular level. That could be like, say, a 50% hike on the current compensation. That could be like a 20% hike on the current compensation. So we are not going by that traditional way of giving like a X percentage hike on the current compensation. What we are doing right now is we are seeing what is the right salary for this individual at this particular level in the market, and that's how we are giving the salaries. So we have, we have skipped the traditional way, because sometimes what happens is, and the reason why we went into this particular mode is because if in case a person is already highly compensated, like above the market, and that person, and if you have to give like, say, a standard hike, which we generally call in India as a 30% hike, right? If you have to, so what we're doing is we are bringing that person really at a very high bar in terms of compensation, and it becomes very difficult to do the salary equity or making sure that the internal parity is met. So it's really important for us not just to hire candidate whatever amount it is, but to ensure that the current employees shouldn't get like really disengaged. That's how it typically happens. So and the mode that we are into right now, where we are mapping the candidate to the job level and to give the right salary, so that's something which will not just help us at that particular point of time, but it is eventually going to help us at a later point of time, right, when we're doing their annual increments and all. So that's typically our approach. So and there are certain times when I'm not even asking like, okay, what's the current compensation that you're holding, because I'm just going by like what is the level we want to tag you to, and what's the right compensation. So that's how we are kind of making a move now.
Got it. And I think that's the most structured way, of course, for sure. So let's move on to our next question. So given that, we are HackerEarth, we have a lot of developer surveys and stuff that are happening continuously. And our research has shown us that developers want a seamless recruiting process. So what tips do you have right now to engage developers during hiring, especially when it comes to hybrid hiring, right? Because right now we're dealing with a lot of remote working, hybrid working, and everything. So how would you engage developers in this case? So, let's first start off with Kevin again, and then let's move on to Gaurav and just check, what's it like?
Yeah, this is actually a really great question. And so I think there's a couple things that can be done, but the most important thing is that the recruiter understands the role. If a qualified engineer gets on the phone with a recruiter who has no idea what the tech stack is, what the details of what the role is, not just that it's a software engineer, more so than that, and can talk a little bit about the company and how this person's contribution can fit into the bigger picture, the candidate is not going to view that as a positive experience, and they're just these engineers, at least in the OL, actually all throughout the world, are bombarded with recruiters contacting them, and it's frankly overwhelming. And so if they do kind of grant a recruiter a phone conversation, the recruiter absolutely has to understand the role and win the candidate's trust. Otherwise, they're gonna have to build credibility, or else it's not going to work. And then the downstream interviewers also need to be well versed in what the projects are the person's going to be working on, who the person's going to be reporting to, and kind of what the day-to-day looks like. And understand that there's a sales component. Sometimes with technical recruiting, they focus heavily on, how well can this candidate code, and less on actually selling the company than selling what they do. And it's super important to engineers, and frankly should be important to everybody, like what the company does and how they do it and how they're changing the world in whatever space they're working in. So building that with the recruiter and the candidates is key to that success.
Definitely. I fully agree with this. And this is something that, we've helped a lot of companies implement as well, with continuously engaging them and like talking to them and giving them tips as well through our resources. So Gaurav, tell me a little bit more about, what you think about this topic right now.
Yeah, so I think what is really important is specifically for developers, it shouldn't be like a traditional way of interviewing the candidates where the interviewer is asking a question and the candidate is solving that particular problem or answering that question. So it should be more like a team effort now. How we have been approaching in the India side is, we're talking about a particular problem, and the interviewer and the candidate both collectively solve the problem. So wherever the candidate is stuck in terms of like not able to really move the needle, that is the time the interviewer gives some sort of hints and see if that person is really able to catch those hints. I think that's really important because that gives an impression to the candidate that, it's not just like a traditional way of interviewing. It's more like, we are working together on a particular problem. So at the same point of time, this is very much realistic as well, because once the person gets on board, this is how it is going to happen. So people will be working together, they'll be solving problems together. So this is how it happens in the developer community. So that's one thing which we're really focusing on. Another thing which a couple of our hiring managers doing, and which is something which is very impressive for me at least. Even if in case the candidate is getting rejected, they would have an impression that, okay, like after like say 30 minutes of the interview, like, this candidate is really not clicking and he's not able to catch the hints, and he would probably be a no hire for us. Still, there are a few interviewers who are actually, kind of teaching or helping them solve that particular problem. It's not about like, okay, if we have, I think this is not going to work, it's a reject, and we close the process. But what the interviewers are also doing is they're helping them solve the problem so that at least they can derive some sort of learning out of that process, because that's really important. It's not just about like, I'm a firm believer of this particular thing that the candidate should also learn something when you're interviewing them, right? So even if in case they're rejected, that's still fine, but they should learn something out of it. So that's something which is probably a good experience. And the last thing that I could think of is there are a lot of companies which are actually moving into this direction. I don't think so it's getting implemented right now, but people are thinking about gamification, like how they can really make the interviewing process very unique. So they're trying to give some sort of, like they're trying to bring that element of gamification and give like, a kind of a game, which is not like, which is a very structured way of actually interviewing. And it gives a pretty unique experience to the candidate, because again, like when the candidate is getting interviewed, if you give them a unique experience, we will stand out when compared to the other companies. And that's really important, specifically for a company like us, where, it might not be that great for like the biggest companies of the world, but the company like ours, right, which is a growing company. So it's really, really important for us to bring such kind of things into the consideration. So that's something, these are probably my thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, especially with the whole, the philosophy itself that both you and Kevin mentioned, right, with wanting to continuously improve candidates, either by giving them feedback or, telling them where areas are that you can improve on, and even solving things with the candidate itself. I think that gives a good experience to the candidate. They know directly that, okay, this is a company that is going to value teamwork. It's problem solving on a larger scale. It's not just, I'm not working in a silo. So I think that's super important for your employer brand as well when it comes to, talking about that. Let's move on to the next question. And this is something that I think is more relevant from an India context, because, and I think most of our recruiters in India usually have this problem, to engage candidates post-offer, right? Because we have, like you mentioned, Gaurav, we have a long notice period. Sometimes it goes on for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days as well. I'm someone who had a 90-day notice period at one point. How would you engage candidates when you have such a long notice period?
I think that, Ravika, that's a really good question. And this is probably the most important thing from the India context. I would say it is, this is an opportunity for the organization to showcase the culture that they have. Because like I can take the example of Demandbase, like we really take pride in the kind of work culture that we have. So it's an opportunity for us to engage the candidates in a way that they kind of understand what kind of culture this company has. That's really important. Some of the examples which I can quote is one thing which we have been doing is, we have been trying to connect with the, because as a company, we are very kind. The people in Demandbase are really kind. They are, very respectful. They really take care of the personal well-being of the individual. So we are trying to give that message, during these 2 to 3 months time or whatever duration it is, like, The example that I have is like there was an employee. There was one of his family member was going through a surgery. And this is something which we got to know while we were talking to him in this notice period time. And what we did was we just sent a bunch of flowers and a kind of a quick note to note to the candidate saying that I hope your mother had a good surgery, and this we really pray good for her. So, and when a person receives that, the kind of message that they get about the company is like this company is really caring. They really care about me and my family. So, and that's what kind of company we are, right? So we really wanted to put that message. Apparently, what we are also doing is once the candidate accepts the offer, we are sending them some sort of a welcome gift at the time, because we don't want to do anything which is during the onboarding time, because that is something which each and every company does. We want to probably go a little beyond than what the other companies are doing. So we kind of send them some goodies, and which kind of shows a warm gesture from the organization. And some of the other ways we engage the candidate is like by scheduling the calls with the hiring manager, so that they kind of understand their future manager probably in a better manner, in a better way. The logistics, onboarding experience, the pre-onboarding, the laptop and all those logistics things that are there. So that is something which each and every company is doing, but it's more about making them a part of the organization, though they've not joined. But you need to have that trust on them that they're going to join you, and kind of start treating them as a part of the company family. Another example which I can quote, which was a really big success for us. So there is a thing called Kudo Board. So that we use that particular platform. That is a platform where people can put their messages to the candidate, like some personalized, customized messages they can put for the candidate. Okay. So which could be like, and they were like all the people who interviewed that particular candidate A in this particular scenario, they kept a message for that candidate, like, we're really eagerly waiting for you. We can't wait to see you on board. Similarly, the head of that particular function, like the VPs or the senior directors of that particular function, those people also dropped a quick message to the candidate. So just imagine a situation where the candidate reads that Kudo board and he sees the warm wishes that the company is sending. So that kind of connects the candidate with the company, and that's what we're looking for, because that's the culture that we have. So how I would say is like the best way to engage the candidate is showcase your culture, and and I think that would really click. Like there have been cases where the candidates had like 3 months of notice period, and we waited for them, and we had trust on them, and there was some promising signs that we were getting from them, and they apparently joined us. And there are like a lot of those cases that we have. So I think it's a big success if we kind of showcase our culture during this duration, Rebecca.
Yeah, so showcasing your culture as well as making them feel included in it, right? Like you mentioned, making them be a part of the organization already, get a feeling of what it is like to work with Demandbase or any other company for that matter. So I understand. I think those are like super helpful tips. These are like questions we get so often. You wouldn't believe the number of times we hear the same thing. How do you navigate this? How do you go about this? In fact, we had an entire webinar there as well, but that time we had it with someone from the US. So it was a different way of approaching things where they were discussing, okay, 2 weeks is a long time. And I was like, okay, no, but in India, we have 3 months at times. How do you do it when you have that? Yeah, so thank you, Gaurav. I think these are super helpful tips for people to take back. I have another question that's, a little bit different from this. I think this is touching upon, what both of you discussed, right? That there are a lot of candidates that get rejected, that don't complete the entire process. And sometimes they drop off at different points. Maybe they self-reject, maybe they, have to drop off for other reasons. What is your opinion on, engaging these candidates? And have you seen any benefit from it so far? Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yes, I'm very much in favor of reconnecting with candidates that you've rejected. We've had a lot of hires, very successful hires, come from that group of people. And I believe you can have 2 number 1 choices, and you can only hire one. And you make that hire, and maybe that person doesn't work out, or maybe they sign the offer letter and wind up changing their mind or something like that. Or maybe another similar role opens and you want to hire the second person. So if you keep the door open when you're declining the candidate, So decline them in a mutually respectful way, and just leave that door open for reconnecting. And it's easy for the recruiters to do that because I always say when I reject somebody, I'll say, I hope our paths cross again in the near future. And that's a good thing for recruiters to say, regardless of whether the candidate was successful in the interview or not, because there's a fair likelihood that you will come across them again. And so developing that relationship, a trusting relationship, where they don't feel the recruiter is just selling them, any old thing, that they're truly looking out for their career and want them to make good choices, whether it's with the company that the recruiter is working for or if they choose to go to another company. Having those types of conversations kind of builds mutual respect and will help keep the door open if you want to reconnect. And then again, what I mentioned before is substantive feedback. So when rejecting somebody, really tell them, sometimes you have to craft a good reason, or sometimes it's obvious. If you hire a software engineer who can't code in a particular language, and they don't feel like the candidate can pick it up quickly, deliver that message. It's not easy, but it's going to help that candidate in the long run, and they're going to appreciate the fact that you're upfront. There are some candidates who you think will be able to handle truthful feedback, and they don't, but that's very rare. It doesn't happen all that often, but it's something to note that it can happen, that you should be prepared for it.
Yeah, and I think you guys are doing such a great job when it comes to engaging candidates, rejected candidates as well. Throughout this entire webinar, we've discussed so many different ways, and clearly they've been successful given that, so many of the candidates who have rejected from your process come back to you later on and request that you still hire them or request to still be a part of the process. And that's incredible to know. So hats off to you guys for, whatever you've been doing with that regard. I think it's so important to have recruiters care for their candidates. I mean, obviously it's not possible to care for everyone, but at least I see that with the way both of you are, doing both global as well as India recruiting, there's a personal touch there. And I'm sure that makes a huge difference.
It's like having kids. You love all of them, but you probably love one more than the other. No, I'm just kidding.
In my case, I know that's true. Like I'm the favorite child, so.
Oh yes.
So let's get into some of the questions that we have from our audience here. So there was one question that came in a little earlier, and I want both of you to give me your opinions on this. How to avoid a no-show when it comes to an interview? So let's start with you, Gaurav.
Sure. So I think it's all about the recruiter pitch. How I understand this particular thing is, like, if the candidate is not turning up for the interviews, I think we're probably not doing a good job in terms of selling the role, selling the company to the candidate. I think that's something which definitely comes as the first point in my head. Because the candidate is looking out for a job. That's the reason we have scheduled the interview for them. But now they're not turning up. It means that they're really not excited about joining you, or probably they're not excited about the work. So I think there is no way we can really go back. But what we really need to do is we need to be proactive and sell the role, sell the company to the candidates in a better manner. Some of the times, like when it's a very senior role, like the recruiter might not have that in-depth understanding of the technical side of the things. It is very important for the recruiter to do a follow-up meeting with the hiring manager for that candidate, so that the hiring manager can probably talk a little more about this is the kind of work that we do, and maybe probably the recruiting side can touch base a little bit on this and talk more about the work culture. But I think when it comes to the very technical side of the things, the hiring manager would probably be the best person to answer to that particular question. So I think specifically, I feel like when it comes to like very senior positions and you're not very confident about a candidate, it's very the quick tip here would be to schedule the call with the hiring manager. And I don't think that the candidate would have a concern talking to the hiring manager before the interviewing process. So at that point of time, it really helps the candidate understand the role, understand the company in a better manner. Also, if the candidate has questions in terms of like how is this role going to be, like, say, after 2 years or 3 years. So those are the things probably the hiring manager can answer in a better manner. So these are my reactions to this. I'm pretty sure like we can't make it as like a 0% no shows. That's definitely not possible. I feel like that's very hard to do that.
Right.
But I think we can really bring it to probably like 5% or 10%. But if you're having no shows more than 10%, I think there is a concern. So we really need to figure that out. So these are my thoughts on this.
Got it. And what about you, Kevin? What would you give as your major tips?
Here in the US, and particularly with Demandbase, we don't have a lot of just no-shows for candidates losing interest or something of that nature. Usually with our no-shows, it's some kind of a miscommunication with scheduling. And so we assure that we actually use a scheduling tool now. So it helps assure that the candidate remembers that the interview is coming up, and the interviewer. It'll send them a message, 24 hours in advance saying, get ready for your interview type thing. The other, I know when you said no shows, you were talking about the candidate, but there's also the interviewer no shows, which can be challenging as well. And so when we have interviewers who, if they're consistently missing interviews, then obviously we'll address it with the interviewer themselves. Usually that corrects the behavior, and usually there's a reason. There's either their schedule is kind of a mess, and they're viewing this interview as an afterthought, particularly if it's not if they're not the hiring manager. Once we unearth the reasons why this is happening, then we can help clear it up, and then they miss less of them.
Right, definitely. So we have another question here on chat. How would you measure candidate experience? So I'm guessing this is something, again, I think we had discussed this sort of question beforehand itself. This is one of the questions we were discussing during the webinar itself. On what metrics you would use exactly to, check out candidate experience, and how do you measure it? So, Gaurav, can you give me your opinions on that?
Yeah, I think it's really when we're talking about the candidate experience and a lot of other things, it's really important to measure it. And I also feel that not everything can be measured, because some of this is quantitative, some of this is qualitative. But we are using Greenhouse as our application tracking system, and we have an inbuilt feature there. As soon as we are done with as soon as the candidate is done with the process, a candidate experience survey goes to that particular candidate within like 24 hours to fill that survey, and that is when we can really get some input. So that's something which we are using in Demandbase. Again, like coming to what I said before, so not everyone will be filling that survey. Like ideally, there is like very less proportion of people who are actually filling that survey. And specifically, I can talk more from the India side. There are very less people who fill that survey because they just kind of ignore it. So, but I think it's what we can do is we can really send that experience survey to them so that they can fill their feedbacks. And what is that we are including in that experience survey is basically how was their how was the discussion with the technical interviewer? Was the recruiter able to help them with the specific details of the job? Would they kind of want to refer this company to a friend of theirs or colleague of theirs? So those kind of questions we are touch basing. So we are touch basing on the process, we are touch basing on the culture, we are touch basing them on what is their overall impression about Demandbase. So that's how we are doing in that survey. Another medium is Glassdoor, because that's where people go and write about their experience.
Right.
Typically, how I've seen this is like specifically on Glassdoor, not many people who are generally unhappy with the process generally have seen, at least in my experience, those are the people who will go to Glassdoor and write their reviews just out of frustration and everything. But that's one medium we're looking at it. But from the organization front, we are sending that experience form to them, which is really helpful. And sometimes we have got some really great feedbacks in that particular form. So that is something which has really helped us, and we have really made our processes better basis that experience survey that we send to the candidates, Rebecca.
Got it. And what about your internal employees? I mean, do you make it compulsory for them as well, to provide their reviews on Glassdoor, or even tell them or check in on them, in terms of what kind of experience they had during their interviews? I mean, they're probably a little more likely to reply, right, once they're already in the organization.
Yeah. So generally, we have like a separate team which typically takes care of it. So we have a process where we're not just talking about the interview experience. We also talk about their pre-onboarding experience, post-onboarding experience,
Right.
induction schedule. So it's a pretty big thing that we do there. Most of the times we've got like, and this is how I would say, like, if the candidate is joining the organization, most likely they will have a good experience. That's the reason they're joining, because I don't think so a person who had a very bad experience would join. Would join the organization. So we're not going to get a lot of negative feedbacks from that particular survey that we do internally, but we can always get some areas of improvement. That is something that we have historically got from that feedback form that we send to the employees who have already joined us. So that's something which is very helpful to us.
Got it. So I have another question on chat here. What are your opinions on connecting with candidates via social media? So I think this is more from an engagement standpoint, I'm guessing. So do you connect with them as you're interviewing them? And like maybe in senior cases, I'm guessing, it might make more of a personalized experience, right? If you're connecting with them on, say, LinkedIn or, LinkedIn is probably the only professional platform you can do that on. So Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? What are your opinions on it?
We hear a lot about social media recruiting, and LinkedIn aside. LinkedIn is a given for those of us, particularly in the U.S. That's our main recruiting platform, the way to reach candidates, and Naukri in India. But it's we haven't really fully embraced the social recruiting as far as the apps, TikTok, Facebook and such like that. There is a way to do it, and reaching out and posting jobs and engaging with people that way. But we have not yet spent enough time kind of digging into that. So LinkedIn is our main social recruiting platform.
Got it. But what about connecting with different, say you have a couple of senior managers who are in the process. Do you think it would make for a better experience if you personally connect with them on LinkedIn and stay in touch with them and kind of check in on them?
Yeah, for sure. I think that LinkedIn is definitely a way to keep in touch with, or kind of link up with people. It also shows interest. I like if somebody is hired, you have the new hire come in before they start. If the entire team reaches out to them on LinkedIn and requests a connection, it kind of, I don't know, it feels good. And it feels like, oh, wow, these people are really engaged and they're looking forward to having me join and things like that. So I think that's great. I wouldn't encourage people, recruiters or companies, to really connect with people on Facebook. I think at least in the US, people feel Facebook is a little bit more private. They're kind of tailored more to their private life, and it's a bit intrusive. If your boss requests you as your friend on Facebook, you're like, you sort of feel obligated to accept it, but then you're like, I don't really want to accept it because that's my personal life. So it's a little bit of a tough one.
Yeah. So we have time for one last question, and this is one that I think someone's mentioned it on chat as well, but it's something that I would like to ask, and we're getting all our webinar guests to answer it as well. Given that we're at the end of the year, in candidate experience, what are some of the things you think recruiters should look out for in the year to come? What are like the trends that you foresee? So Gaurav, let's start with you there.
Yeah. So I think, it's a very different time, because the hiring is going up and down. So I would say like it's very important for us to explore the social media recruiting side of it, which we haven't explored so far. I think that's probably the way for us to move forward. Again, like what Kevin also said in the few minutes back, Facebook, Instagram, and all these things, like it's probably not the right medium for us. But I would say like hackathons and different ways we can connect with people. I think that's what. So I would largely say like social media recruiting is the way for us, and that is really going to help us probably like in coming 1 to 2 years. That's how I'd say.
Got it. And Kevin, do you have anything to add to that about trends you might see?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a trend, but I think there's massive a number of people being laid off in the U.S. I think it's probably India at some point, and we hear these things continuing. So I think, and so you have a flood of presumably highly qualified people out on the market looking for positions that don't exist right now. And so I think that I don't know if it's a trend or a challenge really for 2023 will be engaging with those people now, having pipelining conversations, teaching them about your company, about the potential roles that could open up, and then reconnecting with them when those roles actually do open up in 2023.
Yep, definitely. I think it's a very valid thing to focus on for the next year, given that we're in the midst of so many hiring freezes or even layoffs, like you said, and engaging those candidates can definitely prove to be important in the year to come. So with that, I think, we're done with our questions. So thank you so much, Kevin and Gaurav. It was a pleasure talking to the both of you. We covered a lot today. I think there's a lot of insights that our recruiter community can take from this, and I'm so happy that you both joined us from both contexts. It was great to have those different opinions. And Kevin, thank you for waking up so early to do this with us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so thank you once again. To everyone on call, please do fill in our survey form so that you can tell us what topics we need to focus on in the future. And also let us know which kind of resource bundles you'd like to get out of this webinar, whether there are anything that you like particularly about this, things that we can focus on for the future. Like Kevin and Gaurav said, feedback is so important to us. And also do check HackerEarth out. We have a lot of resources. We have different tools available that can help you increase your hiring efficiency by up to 60%. So challenge us on that and check us out. Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you, Kevin. Once again, have a great weekend, rest of the week. I kind of want to say TGIF already, but have a great rest of the week and weekend. It was so great having you on call.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, everyone, for joining the call.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day or good night if you're in India.